Ellen?
Okay. Can we not get them in virtually?
No, they're good. I muted the microphone.
Okay. Mr. Creedle, can you hear us? If you can, please unmute yourself.
Yes,
Great.
hi, I can hear you.
Hi, if you could just tell us why you're participating virtually and where you are participating from?
Yes, I am currently at work, and so I am participating from home. How are y'all doing today?
Great, thank you for joining us. We just need a motion and a second to allow Mr. Creedle to participate virtually.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Damian Pitt? You
Yeah,
were
hi.
on. Hey, hi, Damian. If you could just tell us why you were participating virtually and where you were participating from?
Yeah, I'm at my home office now. I have a very busy week at work and a lot of meetings and other appointments, and it wasn't really going to be feasible for me to go downtown for this meeting.
Thank you. Could we get a motion for Mr. Pitt to participate virtually?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Ms. White?
Thanks.
Thank you, Damian.
I do not see her on.
Okay. And that is it for the virtual participation moment. If you see her sign on, you just let us know. Okay, great. All right, thank you all for joining us today. Just as a reminder, the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the Planning Commission. We are charged with advising the consultants, the Planning Commission, and the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the consultant team in the zoning ordinance revision process. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting. And as a reminder to the Zoning Advisory Council members, when you're speaking, please speak loudly so those that hear us, or excuse me, that are listening from home can hear us, and also announce your name so folks know who is speaking. At this time, we want to approve the January meeting notes since we didn't have a meeting in February. Is that correct?
We're just 1 month behind on.
Okay. For some reason, I thought we missed February because of the snow, but maybe we have to do another meeting. Just kidding. Did anyone have a chance to read the meeting notes? Are there any comments or concerns? If not, can we get a motion on those?
Moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So now we'll move over to the public comment portion. This is an opportunity for the public, those in person and online, to offer comments on items that are not on the agenda. So we'll start with those that are in the room first. If you could come forward to the podium and just provide your name, and this is your opportunity to comment. Yes, please. If we want to go ahead and, if it's okay, line up so we can keep it moving.
Hey, good afternoon. My name's Stephen Merson. I live on Grove Avenue, Museum District. Been a longtime member of the Museum District Association. I serve as our zoning chair. Just wanted to say a few words tonight. First, I wanted to acknowledge and thank city staff who've been working on this. What a task they've been tasked with and are undertaking. I know they were all busy with full-time jobs beforehand. I know there's been a lot of meetings and a lot of good work for that. So I just want to acknowledge their contributions. Also wanted to acknowledge what, from my perspective, at least was a substantial improvement between the first version and the second version of the zoning. We feel like we're being heard, a lot of good improvements there. So thank you for that. And we hope that momentum will keep up with this next version. I want to talk about a couple of areas where we thought there could be some additional improvements to what is being presented. In the museum district, we have a fair bit of RM housing, in which would allow by right commercial. We love the commercial uses we have in the neighborhood, but historically, most all of the commercial development in our neighborhood has been typically on corners or side streets. And what the current zoning would allow is in many places, you could have a series of row houses, very residential, and have a pizza parlor or a bar right there in the middle of it, which would be really unlike any of the other development in the area. So we hope there'll be some additional sensitivity paid to how these types of more intense uses, commercial uses, could impact areas. Maybe if you're restricted to corner lots, or you consider corner of a public right of ways. They're allowed on side streets. The other, and most important concern we have now is around the plan for existing houses of worship to have a mixed use 3 designated by right. I mean, I certainly understand somewhere in the city that can make sense, but I sort of blanket, well, this doesn't make sense in a lot of places. In our neighborhood, we have churches in a lot of lots, and MX3 would be significantly different than surrounding development. And we even have a few houses that, or just row houses in the middle of the streets that are, technically houses of worship where it'd be really out of sorts what's there. We appreciate what is trying to be done and to sort of legalize the current development pattern in the neighborhood, but some of these things I just mentioned would allow development that really has historically not happened there. And when you have that type of development, it's useful for it to go through the SUP process. I know it's difficult in some cases, but the SUP process has yielded a lot of really good outcomes in there. So whenever there is something that's not going to fit with what's historically been there, taking it through that process, I think would end in a good outcome. So thank you for the opportunity to come.
Thank you.
My name is Meg Lawrence and I live in Vinton Park. Back in 2024, when MX was the 2 letters in the alphabet, I read that a property at the corner of Chamberlain and Azalea was going to be sold to Planned Parenthood for $10. This baffled me because this is clearly prime city owned real estate. And it also was infuriating, given everything we have heard about how landlocked the city is, how we have to use every piece of property. And basically it was given away. This morning, I read a Richmonder article about how Planned Parenthood has given up on the property. It's no wonder, it's a very old school that was allowed to sit. That's the only reason that the city has this property again, which is assessed for over $1 million. And the only thing I can figure out is that someone finally realized where MX should go on Chamberlain Avenue. So that's good. I also received today an email from someone talking about what Charleston is doing to build affordable housing. And there are several parts of the plan. It's a public-private partnership, and they are prioritizing developing city-owned land. So I'm hoping that this is a sign of things to come for us, that the city is realizing that land as valuable as that cannot just be given away. And I'm hopeful that it will have an effect on what goes forward with Code Refresh. And I just have to say again, one size does not fit all. Sometimes you have to use an SUP to make things work. And I'm looking forward to part 3, the administrative part of Code Refresh, where you are dealing with CUPs, SUPs, and community unit plans. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me speak today. My name's Robin Levy and I live in Byrd Park. After 30 years of not living in Virginia, I moved back and chose Byrd Park for a reason. I grew up in that neighborhood. My grandparents owned a home in that neighborhood. And I love the character, look and feel of the historic homes there. They have small lots, so they're easy for me to maintain. And I love this neighborhood very much. And I do support that we do need more housing and more development. So I support Code Refresh, but with reasoning of more density along transportation corridors and nodes, and keeping with what the Richmond 300 plan actually called it for. I am staunchly opposed to turning every single family home lot into a 2+1. My lot is only 110 feet deep by 25 feet wide. Very narrow and very small. It's already 60% improved with just my home on it. Right now, I could add an ADU, which I'm in support of as well. But that would literally leave me almost no open space in my backyard. Right now, the lot left of me already has a full block wall front to back because they have a garage. So on one side, one story only for the garage, I'm completely blocked in. On the other side, I've got trees and birds and air and light, and I would completely lose all of that if somebody on both sides could build 3 stories up. And I'm sitting here in my tiny little backyard trying to listen to a bird chirp and feed the birds out there. So in summary, I'd just like you to focus on what Richmond 300 did so nicely. It says we need to build the homes gently, adding to the landscape of housing options here while retaining neighborhood character through sensitive design standards and community engagement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Betsy Gardner. I'm a longtime resident of Richmond, Virginia. I've been a homeowner here for 28 years in the city. I'm also the current president of our Stonewall Court Civic Association. I've been in Richmond all my life, pretty much, other than school and a stint in Lynchburg. And I used to ride the city bus to go downtown to work when I had a job during the summers during college. I ride my bike to work on occasion, all the way downtown from where I live. So I definitely understand the need for mass transit, bike lanes, all of that, because they're things that I appreciate and I enjoy. As a resident, I really want to see the city thrive and grow in a way that benefits its new and existing residents while not eroding what makes our city unique. I welcome the process to review the current zoning and look at ways to increase housing, especially affordable housing, and also increase our tax base. However, I have serious concerns over this blanket shotgun approach that is the current code refresh. And I urge you to consider restarting this process. Ask yourself, why are the homes in Northside, near West End, Museum District, Fan, Oregon Hill, Manchester, Barton Heights, Forest Hill, and more sought after? And the reason is it's the trees, the architecture, it is the uniqueness of these neighborhoods. Some of them have bigger lots, some have small lots, but they're all very unique. And this is the reason people come into the city. We could have easily picked up and moved when our kids were younger and gone out to the county, gotten a bigger house, a boarding house that would have been walkable, probably even be able to walk over to Broad and get on a bus if I wanted to. But that's not what we want, and that's not what people want when they come to Richmond. They love our uniqueness. We are a very cool city. Ask yourself, why? Why would somebody want to go to, an area that's starting to look like Northern Virginia or look like something more cookie cutter? So our homes are unique. They're irreplaceable. We've got arts and crafts, colonials, Tudors, Georgians, Foursquares, even Sears houses are scattered around us where we live. They're well built. They have good bones, mostly adequate parking, full tree canopies, shade, yardage, yards that give kids someplace other than screen time, yards to plant bee and butterfly gardens, vegetable gardens, and other native plants that benefit our environment. What could code refresh do to this? ADUs. Now, I get that you want to put in 1 to 2 ADUs per lot. They're great for kids moving back or aging parents. But how many existing ADUs are currently used in this way or are for rent? Has the city done an accounting to know how many ADUs are off the books right now? I know there's one in my neighborhood that is not registered, and I suspect there's plenty more around the city. So there's something that needs to be looked at is, are these ADUs really being used as rental property as you want them to be? Because if you build more, you're just going to be adding in more Airbnb, probably illegal Airbnb.
And you could pause for just a moment. I know that was the 3-minute timer. She's the president of a civic association, so we'll give her the full 5 minutes.
Thank you. I didn't know there was.
That's okay. It's 3 minutes and then
Okay.
5 minutes if you're speaking on
Thank
the
you, thank
organization.
you.
So I didn't
Um,
want you to feel rushed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So that in itself has been a concern is can you truly regulate the Airbnbs that are going to come out of this? And do you really know what your ADU inventory is around the city that's being used for rent? Canopy and Yards, RBA Green 2050 focuses on the impacts of urban heat islands, green space, and urban forest planning. Code refresh seems to be like an antithesis of these goals. Allowance of more ADUs are going to take up more backyards, decrease ground area and trees. And homes I mentioned in the city have scores of mature trees. Beautiful, beautiful pin oaks, huge trees that are just amazing. And they're part of our environment that make our city unique. They definitely help with our heat and our rain runoff. Additional buildings and their roofs will create not only a strain on our sewer system, but flooding on our streets and our neighbors' yards and basements. Is the city going to help out with this when somebody gets a flooded basement because all of a sudden the neighbor has 2 additional ADUs? I have a sinkhole on my street next to me and 2 to 3 in the block next door. Additional water flow is going to create more of these damaging roads and personal property. If the city is sincere in its request for more affordable housing, where's the conversation with the adjacent counties? Adjacent to Richmond down Broad Street, there's a lot of land, there's a lot of opportunity. And I feel like we're not doing our due diligence on making housing available unless we bring in the counties to talk about those closer properties that could also be used for dense housing. Land costs, no amount of building is going to make that less in the city. So that's something to consider. Somebody buys a house for $600,000, they're going to split that property. They're going to add another house and sell them both for $600,000. You're not going to make anything more affordable that way. Smaller, let's see. And my last part is, why can't this be incremental? Why can't we go back to the drawing board and go in a portioned manner? For instance, we've got Hull Street, Commerce, these areas that are just ripe for development. You could start from zero and make something truly incredible. You could work on the infrastructure, make sure it's ready, your sewer systems are ready. You could build the bike lanes, make sure you've got your green spaces. You could make sure it's a diverse amount of housing with owned and also condos, apartments, things like that. And also include wraparound services such as rec centers, playgrounds, social services that are needed. Also, I agree, tackle your obsolete property that is within the city and also go after these absentee landlords that aren't paying taxes or are not taking care of properties. There's so many opportunities that could happen without going in and shooting the golden goose, which is what I said makes Richmond unique, are really neat neighborhoods. So that's all. Thank you for that extra time too.
I apologize, folks. I should have reminded everyone about it. 3 minutes if you're an individual, 5 if you're representing an organization. And please come forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Hambrick. I'm on West Gray Street. I agree with everything that everybody has said before. And what I'm finding in talking with people in the neighborhoods is that the neighborhood associations are actually quite aligned with almost all of this, which is kind of interesting because as we roll out this, we're kind of missing something. And being in the fan is like the gem of Richmond. There's not another historic district in the country as large as this one. So I'm on West Grace, and I would question why West Grace was yanked out of the fan section and made mixed use, when indeed it is a residential neighborhood with single-family homes and multifamily homes, just like the rest of the fan. So it just doesn't make good logical sense. It does when you take West Broad Street. It does because I have Whole Foods 2 blocks away. But to pull West Grace Street out, a residential neighborhood, and call it mixed use is probably not the greatest idea. And while we're talking about mixed use, somebody mentioned churches. A number of churches have been sold. Developers have made them into beautiful condos that we go and look at new and all over at open holiday open houses. And I can guarantee you that there are no first-time homeowners in those condos unless they knocked off grandma. So, the next thing is I'm also very supportive of the SUP and the ADUs done with great care and great design so that it doesn't destroy a neighborhood. So if we can make that process maybe a little easier and less cumbersome, I'm down with that. But, by right, no, I'm not down with it. And I think most of the other community members that have spoken here and other people throughout the community are going to do a hard pushback. So, just saying. And the last thing is with big endeavor, we're not the only city that faces this. Charlottesville, just actually two things. Charlottesville has recently identified those short-term rentals like Airbnbs, and they have slashed them. I mean, they've smacked them down, and they've been pretty hard about it. And it's either a long-term rental or nothing. So that's something Richmond can do because, I know there's some quite nearby that do Airbnbs, and, that's a missed opportunity for somebody like my daughter who pays $1,900 now, and next year it's going to go up to $2,400. Well, she's not staying there next year. So this is a real life example that the rents aren't going down. There are more of them and the rents aren't going down. But everybody wants to live in the fan because it is what it is. And it's beautiful. You're going to change that. So last thing, I know my time's up and I'm just an ordinary person. Other cities have done this, mid-sized cities like us, and they have encountered a lot of problems because they did the growing before they did the sewers. And it has created a problem. Boise, Idaho was one, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the armpit of Pennsylvania, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Mesa, Arizona, Oklahoma City. We're not singular. A lot of places have done this and they have problems. And then big cities have problems like Houston and Baltimore have court-ordered improvements in their sewer system because it is so catastrophic. So just, looking down the road, if we move too fast, we're going to encounter what other cities have encountered. And that's it. I thank you for your time. Thank you.
My name is Christian Schick. I was passed along comments to share from someone else. So as a point of order, is that okay? Someone through our organization passed along comments. Can I speak on behalf of them and read out? Okay, just making sure. So her name is Flora Worthington. She says, I'm a renter in the 1st District. I've lived in Richmond area my whole life. But in 2023, I moved out of my parents' suburb and into the city in search of a more livable environment. I would prefer to be speaking myself, but I have to work during these hours, as do many Richmonders. It is unfortunate that the conversation has been so dominated by property owners, many of whom are retired when our city is majority renter. I would like to share my perspective. I fully support the code refresh, and most people I know in my circles do as well. I certainly understand that the Zoning Advisory Council and zoning process has not been perfectly transparent or accessible, but change is needed now, and the ideas and effort put into the code refresh process have the potential to be a starting place for progress. We are in the middle of a housing crisis, climate crisis, affordability crisis, and loneliness epidemic. The common sense reforms of code refresh lay the groundwork for beginning to address these problems. Density is not a silver bullet, but filling in empty parking lots with housing certainly doesn't hurt. It is one of many tools that we need to utilize. Evidence of zoning reform in other jurisdictions, even in Virginia, backs this up. Rents stop rising as fast when new housing is offered, even if that new housing is not immediately affordable. There are concerns about code refresh, which are valid, and I think Draft 2 made many moves to address them. Compromises can and should be made, but total opposition to the idea or process of code refresh is a step in the wrong direction. I've gone to meetings in our district about code refresh and have concerns about some of the opposition as it was phrased. One phrase said that like people want to live with like, and it received applause. That is the Richmond of redlining and segregation. This is not legitimate concerns about the process. Neither are misleading billboards or civic meetings with preset anti-density agenda. We cannot wait any longer. We need these changes decades ago, but the second best time is today. I want to reiterate my support for code refresh and for general increases in density. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Tyler.
Excuse.
All right, Madam Chair, Councilman Robertson, Councilwoman Robertson, I should say, and members of the committee. I'm Bruce Tyler. I have resided in the city for over 50 years. I've lived in 3 different districts, so I'm very familiar with the city. Done a little politicking along the way, so I know a little bit about that. I think the code refresh that's in front of us, I'd say 95% of it is right. And I mean that I commend the committee and the folks that have been involved in this document to put this together. And we're dealing with a lot of issues. 50 years without a zoning ordinance is a long time, but the reality is we're here and dealing with it now. And I think the document is sound. There are 2 issues that this document that I oppose or don't really agree with. And the first one is the MX for the churches. I think from talking to Dr. Vaughn, I sense there's going to be some changes in that as we come along. But the second one deals with single family residential housing. And you know, the way this document has been put together through nobody's fault of their own, it's been put together where affordable housing versus single family housing. I don't know why it's come out this way, but that's the perception. And everywhere I go, when I ask questions about it, I get the same dialogue. And I hate to see something that is really good as the document is to get thrown out because we can't resolve 1 or 2 issues and do it in a way that doesn't create a lot of mayhem in this community. Single family housing versus affordable housing, it's a political football now. And I'm going to say that again. It is a political football. I go to district meetings and I ask the question of people in the room, how many people are in favor of affordable housing? Everyone raises their hand. I'd bet my last dollar if I did that in this room, everybody would raise their hand. But then you say, how many want single family housing to be eliminated? 95% of the individuals in the room say, we want single family housing. These are our voters. These are the people that reside in our communities. These are the people that make up the city of Richmond. I looked at reports back during the Stoney administration. It's very clear to me that during that administration, they saw about 10,000 units were needed. Approximately 33% of the city, according to documents that I've seen, is single family housing. Take that and say 20 units, if I may. Prerogative of the chairman, thank you. I think it's important that when you look at the 33% and you look at it, you realize that's about 20,000 housing units, single family units in the city. If half of them were ADUs, that would be 10,000 units available that we don't have online right now. Perhaps it's 5. But at the end of the day, I think this committee needs to really think about what we're doing here. Some people see social engineering, others see it as the right answer. What I see is, I see both can live together and should live together. And we need you all to put your heads together and actually come up with a document that actually makes sense. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room that's present that would like to offer comments before we move to the online? Please come forward. Thank you. If there's anyone else, you could go ahead and line up because we're already getting behind the agenda, and I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
I'll be brief. I'm Judy Carpenter. I'm president of the West Hampton Preservation Association, which is basically Libby Grove area. And I just want to reiterate the concerns that others have expressed here, such as tree canopy, which is our best hedge against global warming. Trees are our best hedge. And when you take those down, you are really upping the ante. We're already struggling in the first district with our utilities and services, our police, our fire, our infrastructure are all overtaxed. And adding more people and more density is simply going to compound that problem further. Street maintenance is not great. And after this winter, I think everybody can agree. We've got wildlife that is imperiled by overbuilding. And the thought of my having a neighbor, one family to my right, one family behind me, and one to my left, turning into 9 families around me really is an upsetting thing to think of. It totally will change the character of so many of our neighborhoods, which everyone loves and the reason that people want to live here. Just want to encourage before that toothpaste comes out of the tube, because it can't go back, that everybody think really long and hard. And I agree, the blanket approach just doesn't work. We don't want to turn into an Atlanta. Sorry for anybody who's from Atlanta, but that's been a disastrous process. So, and I agree with Bruce also, and these are not just voters, these are taxpayers that should have a say in what's going on in a place that they love. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will also be very brief. My name is Annika Shah, and I work at Housing Opportunities Made Equal, which is Virginia's only statewide fair housing nonprofit. And I'm a resident on the north side. I became a homeowner last year. I was fortunate enough. And I just want to briefly speak about something that doesn't come up very much in the conversation about code refresh, but I think is really important, and that is housing choice. We hear a lot of talk about affordability, and that is certainly an important outcome of changing our zoning and making it easier to add more housing. But another goal of ours must be expanding housing choice. Right now, the majority of Richmond's residents are effectively locked out of living in half of the city because of our zoning. And I'll use myself as an example. I was fortunate enough to be able to purchase a home this past year. I live in an income with 2 households. We don't have any kids. So we were in a pretty good position. We're not especially low income. It was very difficult to find something that we could afford in the city. It's almost a fluke that we were able to find something that was move-in ready, that we didn't have to sink $100,000 into for it to be livable. And also, you know, if we had wanted something that wasn't a single family house, our options would have been even smaller, right? And not everybody is in a point in their life where that's the housing that they need, and the housing that suits the place that they are in, right? Elderly people who are trying to downsize, people who, you know, maybe you're just a single person. And so I just want to bring that back into the conversation, because I think that is just as important as affordability, if not more so, because it is the one thing that we can guarantee, right? If we make it easier to build different kinds of housing, then we can make sure that there are more options for more people in more places around the city that do not currently exist. Another thing I just want to briefly talk about is distributing development and incremental change. What we have seen under our current zoning has been really highly concentrated development in certain areas, in particular, historically Black neighborhoods, right? The East End and Manchester have seen more building in the last 10, 15 years than any other part of the city. So part of what we must do, I think we have a moral imperative to do it, is to ensure that things that are built as a result of this zoning change are distributed throughout the city. So we are distributing those growth pressures, and so that no one particular neighborhood is forced to bear the brunt of the growth that is coming, whether we like it or not. Code refresh is not going to change the fact that the city is growing. What it can change is how the city grows. And if we want to avoid repeating the harms of the past, then I think we have an obligation to make sure that we are distributing that opportunity throughout the city. And in terms of incremental change, the way that you do that, again, is by allowing a little bit of change everywhere, right? You are not going to see every house on a particular block getting torn down and replaced because the math just doesn't work out. And I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Anyone else that's present? Okay, we're gonna move to the online comments.
First speaker is Gwen Cunningham.
Gwen, if you wanna, Cunningham, if you wanna unmute yourself and offer your comments.
Okay, I am unmuted and hopefully you can see me.
And welcome.
Okay, I'm Gwen Cunningham, longtime Richmond resident. I've owned my home for 30 years. I live in the Henry Place neighborhood, which is 100 affordable one-story homes. And I want to say just delighted with some improvements between draft 1 and 2. I think the preservation bonus will be huge in developers not knocking down our neighborhood and you know, just replacing everything with something much larger and less homey. In addition to that, you know, I do really love the new contextual height rule, which talks about how you can't be more than a, you know, pretty much in layman's terms, 1 story higher than your shortest neighbor. Very thoughtful and polite to not take over a neighbor's shade. I do want to add, though, that there's one situation, or maybe more than that, where this is still a problem, is where residential zone abuts with a commercial or mixed use district. The contextual height rule only applies to where residential, you know, in residential neighborhoods. But if you have a non-residential neighborhood that abuts your property, they don't have to abide by that. And I would like that to be shared where they do have to abide by that. They have to act or have the same rules as if they were residential. It's the only way to preserve the sunshine for the people in residential neighborhoods who just happen to live next to, you know, a mixed use zone. And it's not huge in the city. Most of the, you know, boundaries between those districts are, you know, there's alleys or there's streets, but there are a few situations where it's my backyard, it's my back fence. So we did a shade analysis of our property. I think I've shared that, where you know, the zoning would reduce our sun to our solar panels down to 71% from right now it's 100% sunshine. And that's a good amount away from the next door property, which tells me how shaded my gardens would be, which would be completely, which would, I would have no more gardens in that situation. So I would either like the residential contextual, where there's a border shaded, to be changed to where the MX3 has to abide by the same rule as if they were residential in terms of contextual height, or a shade analysis done where any property in a situation such as mine would require a shade analysis to ensure you're not blocking solar panels in particular, but gardens as well. And I thank you all for the work you're doing, and I'm delighted that you continue to hear the homeowners and residents of Richmond, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Jamie Sims.
Jamie Sims, you can unmute yourself and offer your comments. Jamie Sims, can you hear us?
Hi, sorry, I had to find it. My name is Jamie Sims, and I love Richmond. I'd like to thank the council for your time and effort in making Richmond an even better place to live. We all desire affordable housing, but I, along with most in our block, am very concerned at how our block specifically is being rezoned, and I think that may be because you don't know who we are. Our block is bordered by Thompson Street, Grove Avenue, Nansemond Street, and Floyd Avenue. We are the ideal Richmond block, diverse by culture, race, age, gender identity, income, ability, family type, and housing type. We have small apartment buildings, quadruplexes, duplexes, rooming houses, attached homes, and unattached homes. About 2/3 are rentals and 1/3 are owned. We are dense, We are diverse, and we are possibly the most affordable block in the museum district. Who are we? My husband and I have lived in our first rented and then owned home for 33 years. My husband is first generation American, half Puerto Rican, half Turkish. He worked at McDonald's and grocery stores to put himself through college. He founded the Virginia Newspaper Project at the Library of Virginia, where his pet project was promoting John Mitchell Jr., African-American founder of the Richmond Planet newspaper. Our neighbors are a disabled veteran caring full-time for his autistic daughter while his wife works to support them. They are 16-year renters. An Asian librarian who's also a pedestrian bus crash survivor and her dog, and an elderly cashier, former UCrops favorite, who now walks to her job at Publix and who is sole caregiver to her ailing sister. We have young families with children, individual households, elderly couples, students, music instructors, pizza store managers, tech consultants, and a retired 50-year City of Richmond employee, a grandmother, who saved and bought a small plot of land on our block 21 years ago, where she raises her food and provides daycare for her grandchildren. Every single lot in our block is now rezoned for 3-story apartment buildings with by right commercial. This entices landlords and developers to tear down existing affordable housing and to build expensive luxury apartments, displacing our longtime neighbors who need and deserve affordable housing. This contradicts the code refresh goal of increasing affordable housing. Every block in Richmond is unique, and I ask you please to use sensitivity as you rezone each area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Copeland Casati. Copeland Casati, you want to unmute yourself? And offer your comments, please? You should be able to. Copeland, if you can hear us, you can unmute yourself.
I'm trying to. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I had to switch. How did we get so far from Richmond 300 and the Climate Equity Action Plan? Code refresh must protect existing neighbors who want to stay in their neighborhood to protect their ability to thrive as outlined in Richmond 300. Resiliency trumps concrete. Yesterday, I attended a food access forum where Michael Smart and Duran Chavez discussed Richmond's food resilience. But community gardens only have so many plots to lease. It is yards that are Richmond's largest potential food acreage. Seeds sown outside your doorstep are more accessible and create resiliency on every lot. You can't improve food security when residential lot is paved, something code refresh will greatly increase. Affordable plug-and-play solar is finally a reality for Virginia. Renters can now lower utility bills up to 30% with solar. These critical resilience and sustainability opportunities are permanently lost if we allow code refresh to shade us all in tall concrete and pave our soil for sublots. Density does not bring affordable housing. Without code refresh, Richmond added 3,600 units last year, but rents still rose because trickle-down economics don't work, and neither does the density abundance theory. New towers signal to older rentals they too can jump their rent. Illegal Airbnbs, which used to be affordable, annual leases charge even more than the luxury towers. Study the Guild, Ascend, and Jackson Ward's 12-story tower. They didn't lower rent on Marshall, Lee, or Grace, they raised it. We have a glut of luxury apartments, but no rent decreases because what used to be blocks of affordable housing is now branded a premium zone with everyone hiking prices. Density is costly. Even if you do nothing, more people means more wear on centuries-old sewers, more demand for schools, more city services, and massive infrastructure upgrades. These costs are passed to renters and homeowners, ensuring that even if we build more, the cost of entry just keeps moving higher. Code Refresh shows no infrastructure plan. Code Refresh shows no school plan. Code Refresh does show developers profit. It takes 18 months to permit and build a building. It takes 18 seconds for a recruiter to hire a transplant who wants to live in the fan. Supply will never outrun that speed. Richmond must protect existing communities with a neighbor, not developer-filled, Code Refresh Review Commission and a referendum.
Thank you. William Wilson.
Hey, thank you, Zach. Couple quick ideas. I'd like to, just going to be a minute. I'm in Jackson Ward. I'm with Homes for All Your Neighbors Coalition through RVA YIMBY. I'm also on the Historic Jackson Ward Association. Comment to the intersection of ADUs and maximum lot coverage rules. I know going between draft 1 and draft 2, one of the things we're trying to tune down is for a given zoning district, what the percentage of lot coverage is. I think a more modern approach, I'm going to share some examples other jurisdictions are doing, progressive jurisdictions are doing across the country. So it's not just looking at one level, but kind of finding ways to make it more dynamic lot coverage. First idea, this is from California, where they do have state ADUs. So my comments are going to be about ADUs, but the idea around lot coverages is a little more universal. You could apply it to other site elements or design elements. I'll stick with ADUs for now. I think you'll get it. Many jurisdictions in California have what they call lot coverage exemption. So for ADUs, a number of jurisdictions actually exempt the first X number of square feet to allow for the ADU. So this is kind of an extension of that by right allowance, saying, hey, if someone comes into a property that's already up against that lot coverage threshold, they still have some, again, X number, we'll say 800 square feet, they could still build a detached ADU. So this allows a certain by right and kind of ranks our, I know we're trying to achieve something with the maximum lot coverage goals. We're trying to achieve something with allowing by right ADUs. This is sort of ranking it and saying, hey, we still want an ADU allowance should be a little bit more important than our lot coverage. So exempting the first 800 square feet. Another idea, again, this is actually from Arlington County, but other jurisdictions across the country use it as well. They call it bonus lot. Arlington calls it a bonus lot allowance. I've seen dynamic lot allowance. Up in Arlington, they they have a baseline allowance coverage, say 45%. They'll allow 3 to 5% for a front porch. On top of that, they'll allow 3 to 5% for a rear detached garage. We could do something similar with an ADU, but again, other site elements as well. So you have a lot coverage allowance that's actually responding to what's on the site as opposed to just one arbitrary limit. So this is a little more dynamic. I think they're trying to accomplish the same thing, right? You're not just working with one threshold, but it's a little more responsive to what's being proposed or what exists on the site. So I invite you to play with some of those ideas. That was going to be my comment. I want to cite a quick article today that was actually in the Washington Post, which is sort of a similar idea. This is Julie Weil, how Portland is getting affordable housing built. And this is sort of a similar idea. Portland's a city that's, allowed duplexes, triplexes by right, but they've actually added something on top of that to kind of sweeten the deal. So, you can have a 50% lot coverage on your single family unit, but as you add more units, you actually, that lot coverage allowance actually floats with it. So just a quick quote from the article: on that same lot, a duplex could be 3,000. If developers build something with multiple housing units, they're allowed to go bigger. On that same lot, duplex could be 3,000 square feet, triplex 3,500, fourplex 4,000 square feet. So I think you get the idea. They use an FAR. We're using lot coverage, a little different bulk control, but similar idea. You float the coverage allowance with the incremental housing unit, the ADU, the front porch. So I invite you to kind of play with these ideas of either exempting certain elements from the lot coverage statistic or letting it giving a bonus, so letting it float with those additional site elements. So, if you have any questions about that, I'm with RVA YIMBY. You can contact us at hello@rvayimby.org. Thank you.
You will. Carol Simay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Good.
Good, thank you. Very good, thank you. I'm actually going to go off script because I think a lot of people have said a lot of things I wanted to say, which is great. And I really want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk, speak. And I really actually do thank the Code Refresh people and the work they've done. The only two things, really quick items I want to mention now is the first draft of Code Refresh was so surprising and shocking to people that it did freak out. I will say a lot of friends, neighbors, countrymen, and people I know. And what the result of that was, is it created, I think, it did not do us a good service, because what it did is it's driven divisions between, as the so-called YIMBYs and NIMBYs, or those people who have questions about a Code Refresh and those who support it for the various reasons they put forth here. And I feel bad because I think there's common ground to be had, but we're not listening to each other, because that first draft created such a division and concern and to be honest with you, anger and fear, that we felt like we had lost the Richmond citizens, and as somebody put out, taxpayers had lost the point. Now you got to remember also, when this first draft came out, a lot of us who lived here in Richmond for many years said, oh, here we go again. You know, remember the 6th Street Marketplace, remember the Blues Armory and how that was going to be renovated. Remember that it was a done deal, in quotation marks, about the stadium going to be built in Shockoe Bottom. These were not transparent. A lot of these events were not transparent. They seemed to be going on in behind closed doors. And once again, I thought we felt like we were caught in the same cycle where Richmond seemed to be working at cross purposes with much of its own citizens. So that is my concern. And I think the subsequent drafts may help to alleviate this. And you have to also remember, as I pointed out in the first district meeting, when I was there, more people knew about the casino referendum than they knew about this very important issue with Code Refresh and the rezoning of Richmond. And so I felt that was very concerning as well. So I'm hoping that moving forward, we can find common ground and figure out a way to make Code Refresh work to the satisfaction of almost everybody, which I know is not possible. And I appreciate your time again. And as somebody pointed out, the development's going to happen anyway. So I hope we're on the right side of this. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Marion, it looks like Kenton Hambrick is the last one, because my notes say Jamie Sims has spoken.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and unmute.
Yes, and then you can unmute now.
Kenton Hambrick. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and offer comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Can you? Thank you. Thank you for the chance to talk to. Yeah, I want to reiterate my support for many of the speakers, particularly Copeland Casati, who spoke earlier. But my name is Kenton Hambrick, and I'm a retired lawyer. I was in-house counsel to Freddie Mac, the mortgage giant, for 29 and a half years, where I learned a fair amount about affordable housing. I lived in the Carillon neighborhood for 10 years. And our neighborhood is on the National Register of Historic Places. It is also a Virginia Historic Landmark. And it was awarded that status because it was the first fully integrated neighborhood in Virginia. Code Refresh will not provide more affordable homes in the Carillon. Instead, it will accelerate gentrification and erode the diversity of races and income that has historically characterized our neighborhood. Modest older homes, many owned by Black families, will be bought by developers and replaced with 2 new expensive ones, plus an ADU, due to the strong demand for our location, the high cost of construction, and developers' natural desire to maximize profit. Code refresh will cause also significant deterioration of the quality of life in our neighborhood and in similar ones comprising single-family homes on quiet tree-lined streets. It'll double the number of cars on our narrow streets and will cause parking problems. Noise levels will rise, creating disturbance and conflict between neighbors packed closely together. The new mostly investor-owned properties and rentals won't increase affordability of owner-occupied residences, but they will increase the number of Airbnbs. More Airbnbs will reduce the availability of housing for locals, not increase housing availability, but decrease it. It will increase disruptions and cause a loss of cohesiveness in the community. Removing the definition of family will encourage homes to be converted to boarding houses with up to 8 unrelated tenants. We will lose many of our beautiful shade trees, which stand in the way of constructing additional houses. Nor will the preservation bonus mitigate any of these negative impacts. Dr. Vonk told me that an existing home would be considered reserved if 60% of it is retained. So if I'm correct, a developer could gut an existing home, retain 3 walls, the front and the sides, build back a large addition behind it, then they would not have to wait 5 years to build the second home and an ADU. And if there happen to be, for example, 5 large mature trees on this hypothetical lot, those trees could be cut down and replaced with a single 6-inch sapling, and that would be enough to satisfy the tree canopy provision. The Richmond 300 Master Plan calls for the preservation of existing neighborhoods, and the mayor has said that this is one of his goals. But Code Refresh, applied indiscriminately across old established neighborhoods like the Carillon, will destroy them by killing the very qualities that make Richmond a great place to live. And for what? Code Refresh will not lower home prices in our neighborhood or elsewhere, and it will not move the needle on affordable housing one bit. So here's what I'd like you to consider. First of all, leave the zoning of the Carillon and similar neighborhoods to 1 house per lot. Try rezoning other nodes first and restore the definition of family so that no more than 3 people may occupy a home. Place strict limits on the number and concentrations of Airbnbs, which should only be allowed with an SUP, and prohibit the removal of ancient trees without planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Marianne, if there's no one else.
There is not. Latasha is on the line now.
Okay, Latasha, we need to get an explanation from you briefly, just why you are participating online and where you're calling in from, and then we can motion you in.
Hello, I am just returning from a 3-day transportation conference in Stanton, Virginia. The conference was over today at noon. I left about 1. It's a 2-hour drive. I'm really just getting home.
We understand. Thank you for joining us virtually. We could get a motion for Latasha. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Excellent. I know I let the public comment go on a little long, but I think it's really important that everyone get the chance that took the time to come and participate virtually. So I apologize for getting us behind on the agenda. Marianne, if you could get us started with the council recap and meeting introduction.
Thank you. Everyone, at our last meeting, you had the opportunity to look at the rules of interpretation and go over them to make recommendations to the team about any recommended changes on those rules of interpretation. If you have additional comments, please feel free to email those to staff as well. We also discussed some of the administration provisions. I know we'll be bringing more of that back to you at a future meeting as well. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the development standards. Our thought was to have some small group discussions so more people could talk. Since we're a little delayed, if we just want to have one discussion.
This is Elizabeth. I think the larger group discussion would be easier for the public that's with us to hear. If so, unless anyone's opposed to that.
So we're gonna
go into those development standards, you all should have received links to it electronically. There are hard copies at your table. I think Colin's on from the team of making. It's going to very briefly just talk about how it's divided, but we don't have a large presentation. It's more your opportunity to share comments as we go through the document. We'll also have a presentation from the economics analysis from Kyle Talenti, one of our sub-consultants to the development scenarios. Those were just emailed out to you all today on the advisory council, and there's hard copies at your table, and they will be posted online after this meeting as well, along with all the materials. As a part of the email that was sent this afternoon, I forwarded a link to the email comments that we received during draft 2. So that's available for you as well. Very similar to a lot of what you heard this afternoon in terms of the comments that we've been receiving through email. And I could go through those more at the next meeting and pull out some. There's several comments where a lot of the emails were in support of this letter that came from this association. So I can pull out those emails because it is a over 700-page document full of emails. Next meeting, I believe is all I have for you. Do any members have questions for Mary Ann before we jump into the meat of the agenda? Okay, thank you, Mary Ann. Colin, I see you're on screen. Are you going to kick us off on the development standards?
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot to say. I think we're running a little bit behind. So however you want to do this, we're here and ready to jump into this the development. So let's get started.
Okay, so I know we've had some time to look over this section, so we'll just open it up to committee members. This is the time for comments, questions on development standards. Hopefully you did your homework and came prepared. I see Eric Mai, and also the only time I don't want to have to remind you, everyone, say your name and speak loudly.
Yeah, this is Eric Mai. This is just a question for my clarity. Are there typically development standards for parking garages?
Is that
I think the
there
question,
isn't any in the draft right now, but we could consider adding some. Yes.
this is Elizabeth. Eric, are you saying that in absence of them, you'd like to see standards for parking garages?
That's just for my own clarity. I don't have any motivation behind that. I'm just wondering whether parking garage development standards are, ever listed in development standards.
Yes. So we can look at adding some. In theory, parking garages have to meet the standards for every building that have, active depth and transparency requirements and things like that. But we could consider adding some specific requirements for parking structures.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Director Baum for a comment.
Sure, this is Director Baum. So I think, ultimately, as we go through some of these development standards, we can create standards for as much or as little as, we want to see in the code. I think one of the things that I would, advise is to get from this body, like what is really important to get right when it comes to design. Because I think there's a balance and a tension of for both somebody developing and just, I'll say selfishly for our staff, all the stuff we have to check, what is important to get right. So I think, the emphasis on things that are public facing are going to last a long time, that really probably won't change over the life of a building. I would say okay, maybe try and, if you want to get those right, put some standards in. But for other things that again, may change or do that, it would be helpful for this body just, as we go through some of these standards to be yeah, this absolutely has to be in here, or this one, nice to have, but not necessarily always necessary.
Sure. Yeah, I have no motivation. Parking garages are very expensive. Adding development standards on them can increase costs. So
I see no need to add them in here. That was just for my clarity.
Okay.
Lisa has a, no, okay. Charlie, then Brian, then Andrew.
This is Charlie Minges. I tried to do a deep dive on these development standards and just frankly didn't have enough time to get through them all. But one major theme that concerned me was this. We live in a city with a lot of older neighborhoods, both residential and non-residential. But on the residential side, am I reading this correctly, for example, that any pedestrian walkway would have to be at least 5 feet, which a lot of neighborhoods do not have 5-foot walkways. And pedestrian walkways. And there's a requirement that these walkways extend from a house out to the street. A lot of neighborhoods don't have walkways extending from the front door of the house out to the street. Are these all going to just fall in the category of pre-existing non-conforming? Is that how it's going to work out?
Yeah, this is for new construction only. So
It doesn't say that. I think
Yeah.
Well, it does in the general
So-
provision.
yeah,
It's typically only applies to new construction and change. And then some apply to site modification, some apply to change of use.
but yeah, pedestrian and bicycle access just applies to new construction right now.
I'm just commenting, I brought this up when we briefly touched on development standards a couple of meetings ago, that a lot of these neighborhoods, I think Charlie and I both live in one that doesn't have sidewalks, doesn't have pathways, and now you're gonna have new construction building a sidewalk just in front of their house and not connecting the rest. I think that's gonna look a little odd, quite frankly.
If I could, this is Andrew Bunn. That is, so 5 feet is the ADA standard. So that basically just means they have to build the ADA, which is a federal requirement anyways. And that falls under a logical termini requirement. Basically, the logic is a network has to start with something that doesn't go anywhere. And then everything after that will have a network to connect to. Usually the first one doesn't, like the logical termini just is a street corner. There's rules and development standards about street corners, dead ending into parking lots, things like that. So you don't end up with more than one network or more than one segment that doesn't go anywhere.
Where, is that specified in here?
So ProAg governs where you pay sidewalks. So a developer that has to build a sidewalk as part of the proper would have to meet ProAg, and ProAg has definitions for logical termini.
This is Elizabeth. I appreciate understanding that, thinking about where my mind goes, but I'm thinking this isn't, let's say this, it's not the suburbs. You're not seeing a lot of new communities getting built. It's oftentimes an infill. And again, I understand that there's standards, but it just seems odd that you might have 1 or 2 homes with these sidewalks and then nothing for the, if it's infill in particular, nothing, not really like you're building. So you're gonna make everyone build them?
And it becomes, this is Maritza, kind of adding on to that, becomes particularly difficult in parts of Southside where there's no, like stormwater infrastructure, it's all swales. And so like, where do you put sidewalk? How do you build it? In a place where like, I mean, so like, how do we manage that for that? I think it becomes logistically very difficult. And you could potentially having to take real property to build the sidewalk. And I don't know, that would be like taking, statutory taking, if that's okay. I don't know if it's like the zoning ordinance saying that. I'm looking at an attorney, but so those are questions that I had when I was looking at the same section.
Taking, this is Elizabeth again, we brought up the taking piece before. We're all looking at the attorney at the table.
And Jennifer's like, yeah, maybe the city attorney should be here.
And that they're working. Thank you. Very technical. I'm a little confused, but I think I got the gist of it. Charlie, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have started at the beginning better and, but even looking at the chart at the beginning, it's talking about new construction, okay, additions, so certain additions to existing properties or site modifications, and so forth. would trigger these things, I assume.
Yeah.
On a case by
And
case
that,
basis.
that point, Charles, on change of use, I think the bike parking one, I think some of those might be actually pretty difficult to all of a sudden meet. So like if you are changing your use from single family to a commercial use, for instance, or from one commercial use to another commercial use, you would then potentially have to provide more bike parking within an existing building that like might not have room for it. So that I think is a little bit of a challenge if we're trying to encourage like people to like reuse buildings for other uses. So that, and especially with screening, like transition screens and frontage screens, because like, again, like you might not be able to physically, your site is pretty defined.
Eric, did you have a comment on this one? And then I know it's Brian.
Well, just like, I guess I'm just wondering, is there precedent for making exceptions for, these infill conditions? And then, just, thinking about what Maritza's talking about, are there, again, precedent for, exceptions for, or different standards for adaptive reuse?
Brian.
Well, that was along the lines of what I was going to suggest is some waivers for some of these requirements for adaptive reuse, because when you get an old building, you've got the footprint that you've got. But additionally, regarding some of the items that are in here, like the long-term bicycle parking essentially requires a large section of interior space being set aside for a lot of bicycles. I think it's, in a multifamily building, it's 1 for 4 units. So if you've got 200-unit building, you got to have 50 places to put a bicycle long-term inside.
Right now, there's a cap on the number of long-term bike spaces to 10.
Okay.
I think so.
But still a lot. And that's fine if that's what people want, but it does, that costs money and takes up real estate and makes development harder to pencil out and less likely for more housing to be built. But if that's important to people, it's fine. I just want to make sure that we are eyes open on that. And there are other examples, but that's one of them. And then just a dumb question, 445, where it talks about opacity of a fence. It explains what opacity is and how we calculate it, but it doesn't describe how it's relevant to this conversation. Is there an opacity requirement, or why are we talking about it? Is, I guess, my question.
Yeah, there's an opacity requirement for some of the screening holes, so that they have to be 90% opaque at least, so that if you're putting up a wall to screen something, then it needs to have some level of opacity associated with it. And that's just showing you how you measure it.
Okay, so it's 90% opacity?
I believe so.
Sometimes it's 50%, sorry, Charlie Wilson, sometimes it's 50%, sometimes it's 90%, sometimes, but it's all the different screens as illustrated. To technically demonstrate that, it's talking more about the technicality heavy aspect of this ordinance overall. Probably later in today's meeting.
And last thing, and then I'll turn it over, Brian White again, the pathway, the 5 feet versus 3 feet. I may be wrong, but it's my understanding the ADA requirement widening from 3 to 5 feet only applied to spans of more than 200 feet. Is that not correct?
Always 5.
Okay.
So to that point, this is Maritza, Brian. The ADA rules are evolving. Like they continue, as you know, as a developer, they continue to change to meet ADA goals. And that's kind of determined not by zoning ordinance.
Correct.
So some of the things that are trying to like meet the ADA, I feel like we should just not have them in here because that will advance at some point or change. And then we have something that we determined by ADA as of 2026, which will be kind of not relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest we didn't put in 5 feet because of ADA. We just put 5 feet in because it's a good width of sidewalk if you want two people walking in opposite directions to be able to walk by each other comfortably.
This is Elizabeth Andrew. I know you're waiting patiently. Jennifer, did you have a comment on the ADA discussion?
Just a quick one, which I believe we brought up the last time we talked about these, and it came up in our transportation discussion, just piggybacking off of that comment. There's other places where building code is also being brought into the zoning ordinance, where I think it probably should stay in the building code, so that evolves at the state level. Which I provided a comment to Colin, but I think this is an overall matter that would help streamline.
Brian, did you have your questions answered? Okay, Andrew, thanks for that.
Of course, sure. I have two on bicycle parking that I wanted to bring up. The first is going to the number of spaces required. The math doesn't really seem to add up on, I'm particularly looking at the long-term parking. 1 per 4 units for 50 units means a 50-unit building would require 13 spaces, but capped at 10 means that requires possible to meet. It would be 1 per 5 units. That cap. So I think that cap is, maybe it should be variable, or it should be raised to accommodate at least one set of the 50-unit building.
Okay.
And then my second comment on the bicycle parking, you can count public spaces that are within 500 feet, but spaces that are provided by the development are required within 100 feet. So it seems like that's kind of an inconsistency between the two. It's 100 feet for short term and 200 feet for long term, but 500 feet if you're counting publicly provided spaces. It seems to me that it should be 100 and 200 for public spaces, just for consistency in how far that space should be provided.
Okay.
Those are my two comments on that.
Any other comments? Jennifer?
I did do have other comments to make, so you can go ahead to
Jennifer. I'll take Jennifer and then Maritza.
this Jennifer again. Again, just back to I know we talked about it. I think maybe just did the transportation in detail, just on the specificity on the size of the parking spaces and the types of the rack. Again, just providing some flexibility for changes. I assume that those will continue to evolve over time. And then I certainly understand the desire for a well-lit area on the bicycle parking, but just getting into, I don't know what that really means from a zoning standpoint. And then on appreciate the being able to count bike parking in the public spaces. I think that probably would still go into an encroachment permit for the permitting of it. So I think you could streamline some of those pieces. And then on the spaces, just again, thinking through the requirement for the well-distributed, back to Brian or someone else can probably talk about it better, but sometimes the logistics of the site just don't account for that. So, Richmond doesn't have all rectangular blocks. So just thinking through that piece, and the same with the distance. To me, I would think from a bicycle standing point, it would be on a block by block basis as opposed to a footage basis, just because that seems more achievable as a pedestrian parking your bike and going to the.
Can I add to that? I agree with the concept that a lot of these things are already superseding codes and that maybe it would be simpler to just reference those codes. I would say for the type of, for context, I am a cyclist. I only cycle. So I feel strongly about some of these things. For example, the pointing out or calling out cone type racks as not allowed, strongly agree with that. I'm very happy that that's in there. Those are really bad for me to use as a cyclist. Just my tires don't fit in most of them. So glad that those certain specifications are in there. I would agree with the block spacing, but I like that there are minimum requirements for the bike parking spaces because I often have a hard time finding bike racks such as this building. I have a hard time finding bike racks for this building, which is why I'm locked to a sign right now. But I agree generally that block by block would work. And in reference in other bits.
I would suggest for visiting, this is Maritza Peachin, or suggest for visiting the spaces required, or perhaps like maybe not having it since we're not regulating how many parking spaces we require. But if they are there, we're visiting it because especially like with the hotel, you would end up having a minimum of 10 long-term parking spots. I'm not really sure who's parking in long-term. Like, yes, there could be cyclists who are traveling by bike from somewhere else.
Employees.
Here,
Doesn't work there.
there can also be employees, but 10 is a lot. It takes up a lot of room. A lot of hotels have very small. It's a lot of spots, especially when you can like park on street. And then also just going back to the change in use, because if you think about it, like a small nail salon, because it's like would have to provide like 2 long-term bike spots. Like it's just like so let's maybe not have it for not even just for change in use, but for some of the uses that we're saying on here, personal service, retail services, like just all the things, right? Does it make sense to have at least 2, in some cases, going between like 1 or 2 long-term spots that you're providing within the building? Eric, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, or just like a comment. This is Eric, just to add to what Maritza is saying, I think, yes, this bike parking issue, I just can't imagine so much bike parking needed throughout the entire city. And so thinking very strategically about, where bike parking is currently, who has already constructed that kind of bike parking, I think that is more aligned rather than creating all of these requirements for new development or change of use or modification.
And just one more thing, Andrew, I used to cycle as my primary mode of transportation for years in Boston, Philadelphia, DC, and Richmond. I don't anymore. It's like life changes a little bit, but like I get it. So I'm not like anti-biking. It's like trying to think about what's practical for the people who are building and develop like businesses that are trying to open businesses in our spaces.
If I could add to that, Ben, I do agree that some of the long-term parking minimums here seem maybe large for a lot of the use cases that have been brought up. I think there's a couple of specific use cases, especially in commercial ones where employee parking would make sense, probably at a slightly lower level. I think that the short-term bike parking is much more important to me, at least, because it's not uncommon at all to show up to a business and all of them, nowhere to put it, or there's too few and all of them are full. Also specifying that they have to be at ground level is great, because I was at a brewery last night where I had to carry my bike up steps to lock to their provided spaces. So I do think that especially the short-term parking and some of the design specifications around the bike parking is very good. But I do agree that some of the long-term use cases are maybe excessive.
This is Jennifer. I just have one quick follow-up from our transportation meeting. The director of transportation was talking about the new public bike corrals that they're working through. So it might be helpful to have a slide on the website, just tying into those so people can understand where those will be, coming in city.
Thank you. And this is Elizabeth. I know we're behind, but we have 30 minutes and a lot of items under development standards. So I think we beat up bike standards enough. I want to make sure that we don't miss the chance to provide Colin and the TDR staff feedback on other items throughout the development standards chapter. We go like in order, section by section, or? Sure. We're currently in, we kind of skipped over section 4.1, we're kind of in 4.2 with pedestrian and bike access, bicycle parking, transit access. Are there any other comments in that section? We have on bikes, ready to go.
We talked a lot about sidewalks.
Yeah.
So, sorry, really quick, just while it's there. Charlie Wilson, bike user, transit user, et cetera, et cetera. The thing about the required transit stop, I understand that. I just don't know. This is one of those things that I think just kind of comes up anyway in the course of what would now be a site plan review for a project that's substantial enough, gets routed to a number of city agencies, including Public Works, who in the course of enforcing Vision Zero and other good use of the right of way we have, make comments like make the sidewalk adjacent to bus stop wider, right? Like you get asked to do stuff like that for substantial developments, or you're expected to anyway. Codifying it here on the basis of a like hypothetical transit stop, while well-intentioned, I don't know if it like absolutely needs to be in here. And I'm saying that as someone who routinely uses the bus and anyway, so that's it.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Melissa Savinko. I also had a question in that section 423 C2 B. The language that says access to the transit stop must be allowed in perpetuity. That seems excessive and strange. Jennifer's nodding her head. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because that, and the fact that the zoning administrator could just require that also seems a bit odd.
Is the, Brian White, is that language intended to mean that that private property without an easement has a de facto easement in perpetuity?
Essentially, yes.
That's what I was, right, so I was also wondering.
Well, I mean, I'd love to hear the consultant's comments on that because I think that's problematic.
Yes, it was. So if you guys think the standard doesn't make any sense at all, we're happy to talk to staff about removing it.
It's private property, and if the city wants an easement, they can request an easement and work that out. But to say if you buy property in the city, we may take some of your land from you, feels dangerous.
It's a very small piece of land in the scheme of things.
I hear you.
Charlie, make it Jennifer.
This is Jennifer. That, Colin, that falls in that same category that we had talked about at the last meeting on, even if it's a small piece of land that you can't do that.
Charlie Wilson, I want to clarify my comment was intended to speak to a scenario where Public Works is asking you to install that in the right of way. I did not want that comment to be construed as me supporting or suggesting an on-site easement for transit stop is expected in the site plan process. It would probably not be. So, point of clarification.
Maritza Peachen. On D of this section, all projects located on current or future identified transit route as determined by GRTC. A little challenging because you don't know, like GRTC can kind of change its bus lines very quickly. And so you don't really know if when you'll be on the future, just too open.
Yeah. I hear you.
Anything on vehicle access and mobility? Go ahead, Melissa.
This is Melissa Savinko. I had a question down in the design standards. So 431D, general, and then A, says every platted lot is allowed at least one driveway. And so my question is that every lot in the city is allowed a driveway?
Well,
Yes.
this is what happens. Have an alley. I thought if you had alleys,
You have to use your alley.
you had to use your alley and not a driveway.
Currently,
That's what it says in F. So I wonder if like F and A need to be combined.
Yeah.
Yeah, it needs a little tweaking.
But it is good to combine them because you are allowed a driveway.
Yeah, and what happens if there's not an alley, but you're in a city existing neighborhood? Does that mean everybody can just, as long as they can get a curb cut from the city, they can have a driveway?
Yeah, we need to refine some of this language. So, but I mean, it's just trying to suggest that, everybody gets at least one driveway so that it's clear that you're not going to end up developing and not have, someone's going to say you can't have a driveway. So we can clarify that language.
I know, Charlie, you're being patient, but if someone who lives on a street where everyone's chopped up their front yards for a driveway, it looks awful.
Well, I just don't think it's a practical thing to do in a lot of
I
the
agree.
existing city neighborhoods. So I'm just trying to understand how it would work.
Charlie Wilson, if I may, the process to install a driveway, you have to get what's called a working street permit, and Public Works issues that, you apply for it. I've applied for some, and I've told the client, hey, this is maybe a little optimistic. I'm not sure if Public Works will let you do it. So even if zoning were to say, you get it, you go to apply for the permit, they might say, oh no, this is on the 2800 block of East Broad Street. Like, you're not getting for an example, right? They're not going to let you on a case by case basis always do that if the context from a pedestrian standpoint doesn't support that vehicular conflict. So I've seen applications where Public Works just straight up denies someone's request to do a driveway. So to the extent that could be coordinated with what we're doing here.
It's addressed in C2.
Right. I just wanted to answer, like, there's another variable to how do you build in the city than just the zoning, so.
I guess I want to, Maritza again, Colin made a comment that every parcel needs to have a driveway. And Melissa and Elizabeth said, basically, no, they don't. In some neighborhoods, it doesn't make sense for even if they don't have an alley, for every house to be permitted a driveway. So I'm not sure that what I've heard, at least from the ZAC, I don't think everyone on the ZAC believes that every parcel should have a driveway, even if they don't have an alley.
Well, this is Melissa Savinko again, and I guess I'm just trying to work through this in my head, and we need some of the practicing lawyers to weigh in on it. But what are you doing if you give everyone the right to have a driveway by city ordinance?
The Public
I mean,
Works,
Works can say, maybe they can say no
Yeah,
if
they
you're
can
trying to get
say
a driveway on Broad Street or whatever, but what if you're in the museum district?
they could still say no. They would definitely say no in that case.
So we'll strike 1A.
Do you have a comment about why?
Yes. In general, so if these are on and Richmond streets are city maintained, not VDOT maintained, but if these are on VDOT owned roads, they have to follow VDOT access management standards, which I believe applies on US highways, anything that's near US highways. So access management standards determine how many driveways can be on a road, like the density of driveways or access points in general. So they would have to meet access management standards. DPW may also have its own access management standards. I don't know that for sure, but it's very likely, I would think, because those are pretty typical things that Department of Public Works would have, or now the DOT that we now have. So there may be additional standards that already apply that would determine things like how many driveways can be on a road, the process for applying for a new access along a road, things like that, that would have to be considered in this scenario.
Thank you, Andrew. This is Elizabeth. I think the consensus was we take out every platted lot is allowed at least one driveway, and maybe the approach, and I'm looking at Director Volink, is we need the Department of Transportation and DPW to go through here, and maybe where there's redundancies or something that's covered under DPU, they should just reference as allowed by DPW standards or as allowed by EDOT, just to clear up some of this. Jennifer, you had your hand raised before you got up. Charlie, you have come too. Did make everything okay? Charlie,
Dead horse. Yeah, we're good.
the other Charlie?
Sorry to get back to this, but I just want to make sure in terms of applicability of all these standards. I get it now that it's for new construction. That new construction that presumably would include the ADU and the second, the residential unit. Is that correct? They would have to comply with all this.
Yeah.
Okay, even if they don't.
I mean, if they were putting in a driveway. Yes.
Well, go back to the sidewalks. Even if there are no sidewalks in the neighborhood, they would have to have a sidewalk going out to wherever.
Yeah, I mean, you probably don't want to create an ADU and not have a sidewalk connection to the street. I wouldn't suggest that was a good idea, is it?
Okay, I'm just asking to see if the intent is to apply their.
To that point of Colin, if the ADU is in a neighborhood like somewhere in the south side where there isn't a pedestrian walkway, the walkway would just be, in this case, a driveway, most likely, and they're accessing it through the driveway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as the driveway is 5 feet wide, I think that would cover it.
Double, you don't have
At
to
least
have
5
like
feet wide.
a sidewalk
No.
and
Although I don't think
No.
it says, this is Curly Minge, I don't think it says that you can.
Yeah.
Do this,
You can clarify that.
Makes sense, but and then on the same issue of what's applicable, the landscaping section of development standards is not mentioned at the beginning, this whole section, which divides up the new construction, the addition and so forth. So where does that fall? Is that for anything and everything? Is it just for new construction?
Let's have a look at the table. So parking lot landscaping is new construction and site modifications.
Thank you. Yeah, you're asking about like the 10% tree coverage.
Yeah, but
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This is Elizabeth, there's some things referenced in landscaping that aren't covered in the cross-reference chart.
Yeah, 4.5 isn't on there at all.
but should 4.5 be on there? I guess is my question.
I think for
Yeah. 4.5 and 4.6.
4.6, yeah.
4.7 are not in the applicability statement.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, yeah, okay. Tree canopy thing needs to go in there. Yeah, great.
This is really means it's important because if you got an existing home, I don't know whether you got to comply with those or not. And as long as you got properly identified on this chart, it has to be new construction. You don't have to go back and do it, but otherwise you would. Okay.
Jennifer Mullen, just along that same line, Colin, you could look at point 1C1B, and you're thinking about clarifying the walkway and the driveway.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? Whereabouts was that?
4.2, oh, it's on page 44. 4.2.1C1B. I think it has that you have to have the pedestrian walkway on both sides of the driveway.
Mm-hmm.
It's referencing it. I don't know if you're meaning that to be something different, but just to clarify that while you're looking at the pedestrian walkways or the driveway serving as a walkway.
Yeah, okay.
So, this is there. Just regarding this tree canopy requirement,
What page are you on? You mentioned pages.
yeah,
37.
437. So if I understand it correctly, so, yeah, I'm a homeowner, I'm doing an addition. If my home doesn't meet tree canopy requirements, I'm gonna have to buy a tree and plant it.
Yeah, it's Elizabeth. I understand the importance of tree canopy, but I don't want to be told what I have to put on my property. That I'm gonna have to take care of and maintain.
That's right.
I think it's one thing if it's outside of my lot, but, or if it's more of a public space.
Yeah, I find this more appropriate for, commercial use or, a larger institution, but, to apply this to an individual resident, I find that, very concerning.
This is Melissa Savinko. I mean, to play devil's advocate, though, if we are expanding the lot coverage that's permitted and we're losing a lot of, permeable surface for impermeable surface, and we're losing a lot of trees, I mean, shouldn't we have requirements? Because, otherwise, where are we going to make it all up? We're not going to make it all up on commercial deals.
And to just reply, this is Jeremiah, I love trees. I live in the Maymont neighborhood, but, I think about, I have neighbors, elderly neighbors who do not want their trees and they don't want to be able to have to rake their leaves or do things like that. And so, you're requiring, if that person wants an ADU in their backyard, they need it, then they have to maintain that for forever, and that's an additional cost to them. I just think that is, not appropriate for individual residents to bear that.
This is Elizabeth. I want to throw a question to staff. How is that handled now? I think of my neighborhood. Number of the homes have substantial renovations. It's taking up almost, some cases, the entire backyard. We've lost trees there. What is the process? Is there a tree canopy requirement for renovations? Or, we've got them where people literally put a second home in their backyard through a renovation.
Sure, this is Kevin, you're asking currently?
Yeah.
Currently, there are no restrictions. So the only time something may come into play is for a larger development site, where DPU would be looking at things like erosion control and may suggest keeping trees in to keep erosion from happening. But for the vast majority of our projects, which are like on 1 or 2 family lots, there are no requirements for preserving trees.
So I think we have to give Elizabeth again consideration for more comment. We're not going to make up that tree canopy just by commercial projects, but if we are going to start theoretically allowing second homes or more ADUs, we're not going to make that up, but how do we get around the being trees on private property issue? Or requiring it? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, taking a step back, in a vacuum, we could look at any one of these requirements that we're hypothesizing here, right? And we have developers or consultants or whomever, and we all have our worldview, right? While I might not think that a requirement like this is explicitly needed, I am willing to think about a scenario where this, from a storytelling perspective, makes sense for this document as a whole, right? Where, yeah, we're allowing more stuff, and yeah, we've got people who are rightfully concerned about, trees and shade, et cetera. I feel like, as written, this might be a little too strict for the requirements of it. If we could simplistically just leave it at build a new house or a certain number of houses, got to put a tree there. But to say things like a tree conservation plan prepared by an ISA certified arborist must be provided with the measures to protect, that's when I start getting kind of lost in what we're trying to accomplish and coming up with rules sake to some degree. So if we could, from a messaging standpoint, simplify how and when you might need to plant a tree, what it means if you're a homeowner, what it means if you just bought a house and do I have to take care of the tree for a certain amount of time before I can cut it? Like, it's just, I wonder if we could simplify it, just understanding that, okay, let's say 5% of these trees that we require don't make it because it wasn't the right soil conditions or whatever. That's probably a failure we can accept, right? If someone has to plant, one eastern red bud for every 4 houses that they build, just do it. Just show it on the plan and just do it. And when you get your final inspections, the inspector sees that it's there, then you just move on, right? So I'm not dismissing the notion of there being tree coverage requirements personally, but I do imagine a way to do it that isn't like really, 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 really scientific, personally. So.
And I,
Elizabeth, Brian, and I'm not dismissing tree canopy either, but if I buy that home after you and take that tree down, am I in violation of the zoning ordinance? Because
Yeah, I mean,
it
questions
almost
like
feels
that.
like I'm living in an HOA.
Yeah.
But Brian, then Eric.
yeah, I would just, I don't, perhaps this is gonna sound snarkier than I mean for it to. But the city right of way is full of empty tree wells. And it just feels very strict and prescriptive to say private property owners have to do all of this with trees, and we'll apply for the money again next year and see what happens on the city side. Because it just, we seem to be establishing two standards, one for the public and one for the private.
Eric.
Yeah, this is Eric. Yeah, just fully wholeheartedly agree with Brian, and I think that tree canopy should not be the responsibility of individual private property owners. Maybe perhaps on the commercial side, and I would just say to public, if you want to see trees, tell your council members to invest in the urban forestry department within the city of Richmond and in parks. That addresses, city-owned trees.
I just wanted to hear you talk about the use of our right of way for trees. Similar to how the bike parking is calculated. If there is a future zoning ordinance that has tree coverage requirements, I think it would be good to say, in lieu of it being on private property, you could plant it pending urban forestry approval in the right of way. That's if this is in there in the future. That flexibility could help on a case by case basis. And honestly, more people would benefit from the tree than a private tree in that scenario too.
So this is Elizabeth, but then do we get into whether or not we're in VDOT's right of way and it's in their site, like line of sight? I don't know, I just feel like I'm just gonna stop talking. I'm looking. Right. I think you want to comment too, right?
Yes.
I skipped Andrew. And Melissa, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, so speaking to that directly, again, I don't think that would have to be like a case by case thing, but I think it would be a very rare case that there's a city tree well within the site triangle that's required by roadway standards. That I think would be like a far edge case, very unlikely in urban streets. I do agree that especially in denser neighborhoods, oftentimes the tree well in front of a property acts as that lot's tree coverage in many cases, especially at higher densities. However, I do want to sort of provide the other perspective on this, which is that I'm familiar with, on the public side, I'm familiar with a lot of the efforts going on right now to fill in all of those empty tree wells. There's a lot of very difficult problems with keeping tree wells full and growing. And there's a lot of people who are currently solving that and working on solving that, that I'm familiar with personally. From a more general perspective, I think that especially the higher coverage for the RDA district is absolutely essential for addressing a lot of the major environmental issues that happen in Richmond, especially urban heat island effect. Urban heat island effect is made a lot of big splash last couple of years actually. It's over some of the heat-related injuries that happen in Richmond neighborhoods, some of them in districts, lower density districts like this. But a big issue with lower density development is the fact that they have less public space in them where trees can get planted. So you end up with dramatically reduced tree coverage in these neighborhoods without a requirement like this, because you have less frequency of parks, you have less overall roadway for there to be public tree wells, because more space is in backyards, front yards, setbacks, all these things. So a higher requirement for coverage on private land in lower density districts is really maybe barely balancing it out. And trying to reduce the extreme heat that we've been seeing that's getting more and more every year. So I wanted to make sure that that perspective was said, that that's very important in my opinion for addressing these problems.
Yeah, I don't want to leave the impression anyone here's anti-tree. I think we all understand the importance of anti-canopies. Let's make sure that message can come out. It's just trying to make sure how restrictive the requirements are. Melissa.
Yeah, this is Melissa Savingo. Yeah, I mean, I hear what everybody is saying, and I would have no objection to a less scientific or less rigorous, way of measuring whether the tree canopy is appropriate. But I think we do really have to remember that we are supposed to be furthering the goals of Richmond 300, and there are countervailing goals beyond just affordability, density, additional housing. And climate resilience is one of them. And I think we really just we are going to be losing a lot of land if we are allowing additional building. That's going to create more problems with water runoff. So I think we just really need to be responsible about how we balance those interests. And I think a 20% or an 18% requirement is not unreasonable. So.
Hi, I just did some math on my property side. So it's not perfect. But I would be RDB, which would be 15%. 15% minimum, which is 780 square feet of tree canopy. I guess my question is like, my husband planted an oak in our front yard. It was like shorter than a 3-year-old when it first went up. Now it's like, more than twice my husband's height. 6 years later. I'm still not hitting a big tree canopy because it hasn't gotten big. So I guess like, how do you determine? But then you plant a tiny Japanese maple, it's gonna be small, not a very big tree canopy. If you add those two areas together, we're getting at just about 880. But like that's saying that my Japanese maple is gonna take up the whole area that it's in, it's not going to, it's gonna be like half. So I'm just like, this math is like a little bit mind spinning, and like zoning staff are gonna have to do it. They're gonna have to be like, well, like you planted this tree and when it grows full size, its canopy will be this big. And it covers, but half of the tree covers your neighbor's yard. So you so I just like, that gets really complicated. I like the idea of a deviation using off-site tree banking and payment in lieu, but then I'm like, well, where does that go and how's that managed? So it adds a lot of questions to me on like how is that being done? Like, is the tree going to Battery Park right next to my house? Cause that'd be great, but is it going somewhere really far away? And who's managing that? And like, I don't know if I like the idea of giving the city money to plant the trees, but anyway, it becomes a little complicated, like, is what I'm trying to say. To implement it. I love it. We have trees that we planted on our property without a zoning ordinance.
This is Riley Champagne. It's been a really interesting conversation. I'm also in awe of like many of you here that are like so on it with the details. I'm like trying to keep up. It's great. I feel like there's some common themes of like some of these things, like the walkways, tree canopy, the bike parking, where I feel like we're running into a barrier where it's like these things are obvious, and that I feel like the versions are really good when we're talking about the big projects where a lot of people are going to live and a lot of people are going to be involved in the construction of them. And, like when Charlie's talking about like getting like an arborist certified plan for like one tree in one person's backyard, that seems like overkill, even though I really want trees And I know that this tree canopy provision is like one of the biggest, most popular things, at least for my neighborhood, happening. But yeah, like it seems problematic if we're trying to encourage people to make an ADU, make a duplex. If the barrier to that then is, well, it's too onerous and I have to do too many things for it to be feasible to build that. So maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but maybe with a question to the consultants, the people that are professionals in this, is there a mechanism? Is there a threshold? Is there a way to direct these things? Or it's like, yeah, if you're a big developer and you're coming in, you've got the money, you need to do all these things that are going to benefit the public and the many, many people, and not for like, you know, the individuals, right, where they want to age in place and build an ADU, but not at the expense of all the tree and walkway and stuff. So maybe I'm getting my head over my skis, but like, can we think of something to kind of make that?
Yeah.
Is that right? Because
we can.
or maybe it's in there and we just need to like look at that specific part and it's like, is this the language that makes that distinction between these little one homeowner projects versus these large development projects, right? Whereas these standards are bridging that wide scope.
A great question, and I think Colin,
Agreed.
we turn it over to you,
Agreed.
Mary. Like you're trying to.
So I just wanted to say something really quickly about the tree canopy. The Office of Sustainability has been working on this and we had them on the agenda, but they got pushed out. So I think they would appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you all about specifically these tree canopy standards. There are, like Riley just mentioned, a lot of the emails discussing the tree canopy standards as well. If we make time at future agendas, squeeze in a few minutes for sustainability.
Excellent idea. This is Elizabeth, an excellent idea because I do know we've had a lot of comments about trees, even from, I think, back to the very first meeting.
Yeah.
So this is Ellen Robinson. I guess the question I would ask is something like what you just said with the details. It's just like, it's like driving me crazy. You do, I put a half a teaspoon of this in a full tablespoon and it's driving me crazy trying to figure out what works. That's all barriers, multi-development, single family, whatever. But I guess the question I would ask is, I appreciate what you're saying about the Department of Sustainability, and the city has made a lot of investment in heat deserts, tree canopies, what our policy is, what kinds of things we want to see happen citywide and addressing that. And I guess the question I'm asking is whether or not we are evaluating these proposed standards against program policy that the city has already created, that these detail standards is the result of that, or are these, just a collection of all kinds of standards that could or could not, but they aren't aligned with any programmatic global policy that the city is putting in place for the tree canopy in the city. I think for that reason, when we talk about each development, we hear a lot of this conversation about affordability and someone saying, do you want affordability and no single family? I didn't think nowhere we had gotten to that place that we were saying affordability and single family aren't incorporated into the plan, period. I don't think there's one or the other. But I am a little concerned when we go back to that, even with the single family home. As to what I'm going to be required to meet a zoning standard when the bigger issues of what we're trying to, everybody that comes up here and talks about their larger concerns. And some of these details just seems to be extremely, to the degree that it goes beyond what would be required for an effective zone. So I'm just not sure if we are allowing ourselves to to say, okay, before we put this out here as a design concept for this committee to weigh each one of these potential things, how well does it align with policies that the city has already created for tree canopy for the city? And if it does, and that policy is already adopted by the city, then what goes into here seems to be, should not be in excess of that. Unless there, for some reason, you feel like that's necessary. And I just feel like sometimes some of this weeding out needs to be done before it gets to this committee. And I just feel like we're trying to weed out too much that should be weeded out before it even gets to us.
Along those, Brian White here, along those lines, in my opinion, there are three things that drive the cost of housing. There's the supply and demand is the big one. But then there's also the prescriptions of the zoning ordinance and of the building code that are constantly evolving and seem to always be additive, but never saying, but you don't have to do this anymore. And I worry that if one of our goals is to apply some downward pressure on housing prices, but we are adding more and more and more of what's involved to get something built, we're sort of sabotaging our efforts.
30 to 35% of the cost of a house.
Mhm.
Just FYI.
Yep.
State, federal, and local, not all local. Maybe fair.
This is Andrew Bunn. I would just say that removing parking minimums was a large downward press on that. It was a large removal of requirements.
They may not be in the zoning ordinance, but they're still very much negotiated.
Yeah, it's a lender mandate.
So, Elizabeth here, we have, yeah, does Councilwoman Robertson, staff want to respond to that? And because we're running out of time, and I know we have a whole nother presentation to beat up on.
I don't want to get in the way of that. I think I will just posture in terms of going back to zoning ordinance is one of the tools to implement Richmond 300. And Richmond 300, like many scriptures, is paradoxical, right? It wants you to do A and it wants you to do B, and they are at opposite ends of the spectrum. And I see a lot of things actually are triangulated in terms of when it comes to the built environment. You can do it quickly, you can do it cheaply, you can do it high quality. You get to pick two. We're trying to pick three, right? Of this yes and so I think to understand where we're going in terms of just specifically tree canopy, I think in Richmond 300, talking about, a sustainable, high quality environment. To follow in RVA Green 2050 that talks about, right, recreating the tree canopy throughout the city, and especially, right, it's not equal throughout the city. So in certain areas, we do need more trees than others. But also like when it hits the ground in terms of projects, I think what we're trying to balance here, and we're not fully there yet, but I think hearing in terms of like, okay, maybe for like $100 million project, like they could afford to get an arborist involved and come up with a very elaborate tree plan. Since, yep, we've got great resources to measure what we need to do in terms of tree canopy. But for your case and the mom and pop homeowner who just want to build an ADU, maybe we're okay with like, hey, just put a tree in. Yeah. And so I think what we're trying to do is I think, again, I'll go back to from this body is getting a sense of like, from all of these standards, what is really most important? Because the more we advance one of these standards, it's going to take off from something else, right? It's going to make it more expensive to build, or it's going to take longer to do because there's more boxes to check. And so just understanding though, like if we pull back from that there's going to be things that we've also talked about, like, right, wanting high quality development, but also to, complement what's here. So I'll say, like, I know it seems like a lot of garden weeding, but I think we are taking this all in, and the consultants are taking this in to kind of at the best point, reach the best balance that we can amongst those competing objectives and that plan was trying.
This is Elizabeth. I want to get us to a point where we can wrap this up. This development standards conversation. Sure, there's a lot more comments that we have, and I would encourage you to go through and submit those to staff. And I'm not sure at this point in the game, because we're heading into the next draft, if we're going to see this again and talk about it as a group. So I would just say, please get your comments in, go through it. Seems to be a lot of expertise here that would be valuable to give back to the staff and the consultants. But unless anyone has like a burning desire to raise one more thing on the development standards, I want to use the last little bit of time to go into this other presentation.
Just a clarifying question real quickly. This is Andrew Bunn. Just a clarification regarding transition buffers and like facing buffers. Are those additive to setbacks, yards, things like that, or do those buffers happen within setbacks and yards?
They happen within, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay, so Marianne, it looks like we have somebody new joining us, Kyle. I'm gonna say that wrong. Valente, who's going to present on the Richmond development scenario analysis that was conducted. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.
So at this time, Kyle, if you're on.
I am. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I
There you go.
can.
Uh-oh.
We've got about 18 minutes.
That's fantastic. All right. I will do everything I can. Can you see my screen? Okay. All right. So we were asked to take a look at what the likely rate of change would be based on a series of zoning options that were presented to us. So in a nutshell, our analysis was to do a financial feasibility study of what the value of houses in the RDA, RDB, and RDC zones are, and what would they likely be under these different development scenarios, and understand what the potential then would be for investors or existing property owners to take advantage of ADUs or bonus units and ADUs. And so I'm going to do my best to try and pound this out as quickly as I can. This slide tells you that we looked at it in different sub areas of the city. Not everywhere in Richmond is the same. And so we wanted to make sure that our feasibility analysis compared apples to apples, both what the current value of housing is in these areas, as well as what the likely value of new housing development, either for sale constructed or for rent constructed, would be, so that then we could calculate what the value differential would be and whether or not an existing homeowner would want to take advantage of this policy, or whether an investor would come in and would be willing to make an offer to a property owner so that they could take advantage of the policy. We kind of looked at it two different ways. The first was side-by-side subdivision. And as simply as I could put it is each zoning area, RDA, RDB, RDC, have a minimum width requirement. And so for a lot to be able to subdivide side by side, and I'll use that term a bunch, they have to be at least twice the width of that property. So if it's in RDA, it'd have to be 180 feet, RDB, it'd have to be 100 feet, and RDC would have to be 50 feet. The second thing is the existing structure on that property would have to be aligned so that if they subdivided the lot, there's still enough minimum width to qualify under the zoning, and you create a development lot. So if you look at the image on the right side there, on the one on the left, you can see the existing structure is far enough over that if you subdivide the lot, you'd be able to put a new structure and still fit. Whereas on the one on the right, even if you were able to subdivide that lot side by side, you'd then have to tear down the house or the building that's on there to be able to do the development. The data that you see here in front of you shows you that the number of lots in the city within the areas that are being considered for RDA, RDB, RDC, less than 5% of them are wide enough to be subdivided, and the structure is such that it can be subdivided and still be able to maintain the existing structure. So that was the first thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, assuming I can get this done quickly. We also looked at front-back lots, looking at the ability to put a new unit behind the existing structure. This is obviously, it doesn't necessarily need to be subdivided per se, but you have to be able to have access. And so many more of the lots within RDA, RDB, RDC could be done this way, where the lot is deep enough to fit a minimum sized house and or minimum sized unit and an ADU, and be able to maintain the existing structure. So the graphics on the right side kind of show you where it can work and where it can't work. There are a lot more a lot more potential to do this. If you look at the third column or the fourth column on the data, you can see about 70% in total within the city would be able to build a unit behind the existing structure and meet the requirements in there. You can see that it varies whether you're in RDA, RDB, RDC, but I just wanted to point out here before we move on is that when you're looking at side-by-side only, you're already starting with a very small pool of potential opportunities without demolition, whereas there's a lot more opportunity in the side-by-side. So what parcels will actually subdivide? And the simple factor is what we look at, there's different priorities that owner occupants have versus potential investors have. Obviously, an owner occupant lives in the existing structure and would either be adding an ADU or adding a new structure with an ADU or what have you. And so they're looking for continued use of their property. They're looking for ways to continue to maintain value. And also, when they're looking to into the cost of development is whether or not it's within their means or something that they'd even want to do. Even if Kyle lives in Richmond and if I took advantage of this, it would increase the value of my property. Maybe I can make a little money. Maybe I don't want to see my backyard get reduced in size, or I don't want to become a landlord. And so when you look at it through the traditional home buyer lens, there's a different set of priorities as opposed to an investor who is purely looking at the financial feasibility of this. So we kind of tried to look at it as much as we could through both lenses, understanding that not every house is going to be for sale. And not every owner or would even be willing to sell. And along those lines is we looked at it from what we are calling a feasibility ratio calculation. So if you look at the very bottom of the screen, just to walk you through an example for time's sake, is if the existing house is worth $300,000. And if I take advantage of this policy change, an investor would be willing to pay me $450,000 or 50% more than the existing value of my home. The ratio determines whether it would be likely or unlikely. And in this case would be considered favorable, right? If someone walked up and said, all right, I'll give you 50% more than the value of your house to move out tomorrow, there is more likely that someone would accept that offer than say, if they showed up and said, I'll give you $310,000. And obviously if their offer is below the value of your home, it is highly unlikely that you're going to be willing to sell your property to get a return that is less than what the current value of the house is. So we have done this analysis quite a number of times, and in our experience, there is a likely rate of turnover just based on the valuation differential between what the property would be worth under this new zoning paradigm and what the property is worth under the existing zoning paradigm. And what you're looking at on the right side there is the potential annual rate of change that would likely happen based on where each property falls, comparing the current value of the asset to what the future value of the asset would be. And so we use that information to try and understand what the likely rate of change would be under different categories. So that's the background. First question, how likely is it that lots will subdivide side by side, meaning the existing structure will stay and someone will subdivide the lot off to the side? And the answer is highly unlikely, because not only are very few of the lots capable of doing this, where the existing house is retained, the value creation of doing that compared to the loss of value of your property being effectively cut in half doesn't justify it throughout most of the city. So in other words, what an investor would be willing to pay you for that empty lot that you have just subdivided is not likely worth the loss of value to your house by your lot becoming smaller. And so we looked at this both RDA, RDB, RDC for each of the different sub areas. And the next graphic kind of shows you how the analysis breaks out. And I'm going to try and explain this one time, and and I'm sorry if it's not clear, but lots where it says falls above value mean the existing house, the existing property as is worth more than what it would be worth on the back end. Between 80 and 100% means there's a slight growth in value, so somewhere between 0 and 20% worth more than what the current property is. And then 60 to 80 is obviously it's worth 20 to 40% more. And then over below 60% means it could be worth 50 or 75 or 100% more. When we did this analysis across the different sub areas, you could see very few properties landed above a value that the existing property would be. And so when we looked at this, the likely rate of change would be less than a house a year because, as I said, there are very few of them and the value doesn't make sense. The other parts I want to point out is that only about 0.6% would even consider this because they can do it and the value created would be greater than the value of their existing property. So it's highly unlikely in RDA that a side-by-side subdivision would happen. There's a little bit more potential in RDB, but don't let the number fool you. The three parcels and the numbers there are substantially more parcels in RDB than there is RDA. And so it's still only about less than 1/100% likely conversion created by the value that would be added by being allowed to subdivide. And once again, only about 0.6% of all the parcels in RDB under current market conditions would even be worth more under the new policy paradigm as opposed to what they're currently worth to the open market. And then finally is RDC, and this is a little bit more opportunity here, about 0.2% annual rate of change and about 5% overall of the parcels where you're actually creating positive value for the owner. The biggest differences between A, B, and C is in C, the existing value of most of those properties is not very high. And so by allowing to subdivide, the real loss compared to the value created is a little bit better. It's still not a very high rate of change, and this still would only result if the decision was purely made financially of about 5% of the parcels converting, but there is a little bit more potential activity in RDC. So the second question we were asked was, how likely is it that lots will be subdivided or property owners or investors would acquire and then build a new lot or a new unit or a new structure behind an existing structure in the front to back commentary? And so as I mentioned earlier, we talked about there's a lot more potential for this because many more of the parcels in the city could qualify for this physically than the side-by-side. However, economics is still a challenge. The value created of being allowed to do that compared to what your house is worth today or those properties are worth today isn't very strong. So the value created in that based off of what the value of what someone would offer you for your property that would then have to go build a new structure and either lease both units or sell one, lease the other, or sell them both, depending. It just doesn't create a whole lot of financial incentive for either an existing owner to do it themselves or for an investor to go and try and buy out that owner. And so you could see, in the effort of trying to save time, I just kind of want to hit you the highlights is in RDA, it's still not a lot of parcels that would really would qualify. Don't want to say qualify, that's not the right word, but would be financially feasible for someone to come in and offer more that would motivate an owner to sell, with only about 5% of all the parcels in RDA that would even qualify for this. And I want to pause here just for a moment to say this analysis does not take into account those neighborhoods or those subdivisions where there are covenants through a homeowners association, for example, that would even forbid this to happen. We weren't able to tease that out of the data. And so this is looking at everything where it's all possible. There's likely areas, particularly in RDA, those larger lot parcels, many of them are in subdivisions that probably have, or that we know have restrictive covenants from an HOA, which would make this not feasible. But I say that just to give you the understanding that these are extremely hypothetical from a standpoint of being overly aggressive, because we know that there's going to be other things that link. But this is what the numbers could possibly be. About 4 parcels are about 0.1% annually, and about 5% of the parcels that would even draw interest from an investor that'd be willing to pay more than what the current value of the property is worth. When you go to RDB and RDB for the front back strategies, it becomes more likely, because the value created in these zones where the existing houses are a little bit less in cost, and you can still create a pretty a comparatively stronger value of the additional units behind. You can see there would be about 0.6% potential annual change based on the value creation, and about 27% of all the parcels within RDB where our math shows that the new policy would make the property worth more than what the current assessment is. And then in RDC, the conversion rate would be about 1.1 or a little bit over 1% annually, because you're really starting to create some value, because these are more modest priced housing units. And so the value created by being allowed to do another unit and an ADU create some value, with about 34% of the parcels where the new policy would create more value than what the existing property is worth under the current zoning requirements. The third question we were asked, would there be more uptake if you weren't required to maintain the existing structure and add 2 units, that you were allowed to tear down the existing structure and build back two new full-size units and an ADU? So basically taking away the preservation requirement and allowing it to be all tear downs. And the short answer is no. It's actually, when we did the analysis, it is more financially advantageous in most cases, in almost all the cases, to be honest with you, to preserve the existing unit and build the 2 new units as an additional structure than acquire the property at full market value of what it is worth today, incur the demolition costs of removing that building, and then building back a new structure to be able to get to the 2 full size and the 1 ADU. The reality is that the cost of housing, or the value of housing in terms of sales in the marketplace, just don't justify acquiring a full property at market value, demolishing it, and then building something back there to then turn around and sell that. And so our analysis showed that it is highly unlikely that the tear down would be an option that most properties would take. Now, of course, there's always going to be the situations, for example, like, is it a blighted property, or is it dilapidated, or it has substantial functional obsolescence? Yes, we're not saying that it would never occur, but when we did the math based on what current values of properties are compared to what the value would be created for that lot if it were sold to be a tear down and rebuild, just didn't justify the numbers. And so here you're looking at the analysis of what it would be in RDA, which would be less than 1 parcel compared to 4 under the preservation. It's 18, which is less than what it was under the preservation. And then in RDC, it would be even more challenging, only because the sale price of new units just doesn't justify the cost of acquiring and demolition. And so basically, in short, even if tear downs were allowed to tear down an existing structure and build back 2 full size and an ADU, it is less financially advantageous to a property owner than for an investor to come and just buy that existing property, keep the existing structure, and build new behind it. So that was the big takeaway from that. And then we were asked, the last question, I promise, was that we were asked, what if the owner occupant wanted to do it? So, and they wanted to maintain it for themselves, so convert the 2 new units on the property into rental units. So rather than an investor coming in and buying it and either selling all 3 units separately or maintaining it, the existing owner occupant would want to just take advantage of this. And what we learned is that there is some potential there, but it is pretty much most financially advantageous in RDC, in those smaller, more modest value properties within the city. RDA, the value that is created, or the let me put it a different way, not the value is created, but the cost and the impact of taking away part of a property and building new structures on that to generate revenue as rent to the existing owner occupant doesn't justify the cost and the loss of value of removing that portion of land from the usable space for that property, like as a yard. And so the data shows the impact, RDA, not very much conversion with only about 2% of the total units that would likely create a value benefit that an owner occupant would take advantage of. In RDB, it's about a 0.4 or 0.4 of 1%. That would likely do it with a maximum of value creation of 13% for them, meaning the property and the cash flow of those units would be worth more than what the current value of the property as is. And then it's a little bit stronger. Once again, RDC, you would see about a 1.2% potential conversion, and about 33% of the parcels that would likely, or that would create a more value for an existing owner to build new structures and rent them. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, I promise, until I answer your questions for that you have, is these aren't cumulative. It's one or the other. So the 33% likely participation of owner occupants doing it is likely the same 27% that we saw where an investor would come in, buy it, preserve it, and build new units. And so it's not like these all compound on each other. It is, you would go one path or the other, but it's not different parcels that qualify well for question 4, but don't qualify well for question 2 and vice versa. And so summarizing, it does create opportunities for new housing development. There likely would be some investment, some properties where investors or existing owners would take advantage of it. It is much stronger in the RDC area than in RDB, RDA, but it does graduate. So RDA is probably not much change. RDB would be what I would call very modest change, and then RDC, you over time could see some modest change. So I apologize, I went 3 minutes too long, but that's my presentation.
That's okay. I know we are at the end of, I suspect there's going to be a lot of questions. Mary Ann,
Kyle is going to be joining us at the next month's meeting.
Okay.
So this was just to introduce the topic to you, have a chance to hear his explanation, and then at next month's meeting, we'll have an opportunity for questions and conversations with.
Can I ask one baseline question? Can we get a description of what these sections are? Like, I can't tell from the map. 1 through 6.
Did you actually put your?
Yeah, there's a districts, it's divided into 6 districts. I can't tell. I would like the
You want a bigger?
parameters of the actual district. Yeah.
Street.
Because they're not alpha districts
The
or.
question I was gonna ask is what, for the same thing, is there an overlay for the RA, RDA, for the same zoning that they have there, so that we can see where those, where they're located as well?
So you want a zoning map with these market areas laid on
Overlay
top
for
of it?
these, yes.
Yeah, okay. I think we can do that. We'll give it a shot.
And my last question is, why was there no analysis of RA or RM? A few questions.
Because we didn't ask them to do that. I think we
That's
just,
a-
we. Go
It
ahead,
was a
Kevin.
strategic consideration. So I think where we started, we wanted to start with detached areas. See where it went with that analysis. If you want us to go further, we can look and maybe do some additional in that. But I think just also from what we've heard from public comment, those in the detached areas were ones where we were hearing more concern about or the questions about what would that rate of change be? So that's why we started with those.
Yeah, I understand. There just are a number of areas that are RA in the community I serve that have been redesigned as RM, which would be allow additional, pretty substantial additional density.
if there's an ability to, may want to consider that. So, Mrs. Elizabeth, it sounds like we will get some more information on this presentation, and I will be back next month to continue the conversation. And this will also be posted online for, okay. So I'm gonna, with that, end the meeting and just remind everyone that the next meeting is here in this conference room, April 8th at 4 p.m. We are adjourned. Your brain.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you all.
When there's a- 2 hours. Yeah, 2 hours into these meetings.
Yes.
How you doing?
How are you?